Where I think we should start would be my first wedding. And really to showcase what my first weddings look like, because the point of this course is to talk about progression, because far be it from me to ever teach a course about getting published without explaining what it looked like for me in the beginning. Because what I think a lot of times happens is that newer photographers will look and say, well, that will never be me, or they disqualify my opinion because they think that I'm at a point to where I'm absolved from ever feeling the pains of being a first or second year photographer. And I think that that's quite the opposite. We've all been there. So in order for me to actually prove a valid point, I'm gonna be talking very heavily about my first and second year of photography and showcasing those images. So hang on for the ride. Okay, it was important for me because at this point in my business, by the time I had shot my first wedding, I had photographed up to around 15 or 20 weddings as a second, third, or fourth photographer. Yes, I was a fourth photographer. And this was like a fourth photographer for like a wedding of like 125 people. You do not need 4 photographers for a wedding for 125 people. I was shooting the photographer's shooting. But either way, it was fine, and I will never forget being a fourth photographer. I had driven 2 hours to shoot this wedding, and JD had taken me. It was on a Saturday, he had a day off from work, and he had driven me 2 hours to get to this wedding, and he dropped me off, and he ended up just going and hanging out at a restaurant for the duration of this wedding, which was around 6 hours. I worked for free. The photographer patted me on the back and said thanks, and then I went home, and I sent the images to that photographer, and that was my very first, like, fourth shooting experience, and it was my last, but either way, it was a great experience, and I learned from it, and I was willing to do whatever it took. So I took a lot of jobs that didn't pay me in the beginning, but I talked heavily about that in the first and second course, and we can get into that in Q&A if you would like, but for this course, we're going to kind of gloss over that notion of how to become a second or third shooter and go directly into my very first wedding. So, up until this point, I was very confident with the ebb and flow of a wedding day. After 15 to 20 weddings, I understood what the wedding day looked like. So by the time I booked Christina and Danny's wedding in late September of 2005, which was my very first wedding, I was so extraordinarily excited. I was very nervous. I was, having heart palpitations. It was really exciting, but at the same time, I knew there was a very big mountain for me to climb ahead of me. But I was like, okay, here we go. Now, what I want to talk about, though, is the importance of creating a slideshow. Before I actually showcase what my first wedding looked like, I need to explain my belief in how staunchly I became such a supporter of this ideas of slideshows, because I was first and foremost a bride before I was ever a photographer. I was not a photographer when I got married, and so I need to always look back to that experience as I wasn't jaded by the industry. I didn't have any preconceived notions of what should be done or how it should be done. I simply took my first wedding experience and applied it to my own business. And during that first experience, my wedding photographer provided for me a slideshow. I'll never forget, on my honeymoon, seeing a slideshow of my wedding just that had happened like 1 or 2 days earlier, and just being so moved because of the way that he documented, the way that he captured those memories and then archived them in a way that was shareable for my friends and my family, specifically because JD and I had a destination wedding. We had around 25 people, and there were so many people in Hawaii, and there were so many people back in the mainland who wanted to share that experience, and with a simple click of a button, we were able to share our story. Now, for me, I'm gonna get into that a little bit later, but it was important for me to create an emotional connection, because what we're selling to our clients is, yes, our services, but we're also selling the emotions that are connected to our services. So how then do we go out and create those emotions beforehand? How can we be in front of the emotional connection that people are feeling to those images? And I think that for me, it's best served through a slideshow. So, having said that, we're going to start this class off with a bang. And Nico, I would like to show my very first slideshow for Christina and Danny's wedding. And they're going to show that here, and there is music to it, so if we can make sure the speakers are working. Okay. Thank you, Nico. Okay, so as I was watching it, I realized that there's probably people thinking, why is she showing us her first slideshow? And it's not because I think, whoa, those were some pretty epic photos, okay? Let's just get that out in the open. I needed to clearly show where I started and what I was given. That's really important for me. And also, having watched the slideshow, what we need to do is to extract ourselves from being photographers and watch it as viewers. Watch it as a friend of the bride. Watch it as a bridesmaid, watch it as a cousin, watch it as the bride herself. Because as photographers, we look at all the imperfections, but what we need to do, which was how I first viewed my slideshow, was to look at it from a bride's perspective and the emotional appeal that we're providing for it. And Michelle, are you crying? Was it so moving? Are you crying?
Actually, yes, it was.
Oh my God! I was totally joking. I was just like, oh, my images were so moving, I'm sure.
It just brings me back to the time when I was looking at my slideshow after my wedding day, and just being able to see something like that so quickly after really brings you back to the experience of your wedding day.
Well, thank you. Thank
I
you.
was watching it as a friend of the bride. I don't know her, but it was great.
Michelle, okay, good. And that was actually, that's where I want to bring us, because what happens is that we view it from the scope of being a professional, from being something of immediately going to its flaws, as instead of appreciating for what it is at the moment. Now, I show that to you so that you guys know exactly how I curated that wedding from an emotional standpoint and a business standpoint. But the slideshow for me ended up being really important because things did not pan out the way that I had expected. Now, this is probably very familiar for a lot of people, but I'm going to read what I published. Okay, I don't even know where to begin right now. I'm just like stuttering of my own words. Okay, so in November of 2011, I had the opportunity to self-publish a book in magazine form entitled Exposed. And I detailed my first wedding experience. And I was going to recount what happened with the wedding, but I think that the writing in the magazine succinctly tells that story a little bit better. So I'm gonna walk through a portion of the particular section entitled Shooting My First Wedding on My Own. And it's located on page 85, and I'm gonna be showcasing photos from the actual wedding day that kind of included what was happening at that moment. Now, I should probably preface this part of the story, because I can't read the entire thing, but I should preface the story by saying my second shooter, who I had brought along for the day, it was a Friday wedding. And Nico, thank you so much. Thank you so much from this menopausal woman. I'm really not going through menopause, but wow, I was getting hot flashes like I was. Okay, so prior to this point, I had brought along a friend to second shoot the wedding, but the wedding was on a Friday and she had a full-time job, but she said, don't worry, I should be able to be there on time. She was going to miss a portion of the makeup, but she's like, I'll be there by the time they actually get to the wedding venue. She called me when she was supposed to be there and she says, I'm stuck in traffic, and she's coming from a really far point. And I started getting really ill because I was like, oh my God, this cannot possibly be happening. JD was with me, but I brought him along as like, dude, I just need your help. Like, can you just come help and carry bags and just keep me sane for the day? And all of a sudden, he became the second shooter. So if you've ever had a moment where you're like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. It was totally one of those moments. So having said all of that, bringing that up to this point, working with the second shooter who was quite literally being like, oh my gosh, just throw it on this mode, we'll be okay. Moment to this. By the time they walked down the aisle and waited for family portraits and bridal party pictures to begin, it was pitch black in the garden. Of course, there weren't any lights anywhere. As the family gathered for photos, they were silhouettes, black figures whose voices expressed the desire for stiff drinks. I quickly tried taking test shots, but it was so dark, my camera couldn't focus, which, of course, didn't trigger the flash. I didn't know what to do. I was sweating bullets, and I turned to JD, and I said, you need to fix this. Yes, I acted like sunset was all his fault, but cut me some slack. I was having a moment. JD looked around, channeled his inner MacGyver. He ran to the car to grab a flashlight that he kept in the trunk. Oh, you read that right, a flashlight. I cringe now at the ghetto-ness of it all, but guess what? It worked. I gathered the family in the bridal party while JD held the flashlight to illuminate the family and the bridal party, and once positioned, the flashlight provided just enough light to get the camera to focus. So this is right now, this is a moment when I'm realizing I should be shooting and I'm having an oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, because I realize I have not done any of the photos up until this point. The bride had requested to do all of her photos after, and all the the spaces that I had arranged, like this would be a great spot, this would be a great spot, was now located in pitch black because it was a garden wedding. And I'm watching sunset, realizing, what am I going to do? There's no lights. So this right here is the very first bridal party photo that I've taken with flash. Now you can guess correctly that these pictures weren't very good. In fact, I'll just come out and admit that they were terrible. So terrible, I feared the bride would demand a full refund and I'd never work again. I wanted to crawl into a ball and rock myself into next week, but I couldn't because it was time to photograph the bride and groom in the darkness of the garden. All the locations I had scoped out earlier in the day were now completely hidden in darkness, and though I should have taken sunset and the ceremony start time into consideration, I didn't. It was a rookie mistake. I quickly assembled Plan B, which comprised of photographing the couple wherever light was available. A few lampposts were scattered around the estate, so we ventured to all of them, as well as a walkway with overhead lighting. As you can imagine, my desperation was growing by the second. But because I had no other options, I decided to take the couple into a Victorian house on the premises and shoot indoors. Given the limited space and light and the flash know-how, JD and I did the best we could. The bride and groom rushed back to the garden for the grand entrance, and I walked immediately into the first dance. We were, again, photographing the couple against the night sky with very limited light, but we continued to remain focused and push ourselves. At the end of the evening, we gathered our gear, packed up our car, and drove home feeling every emotion imaginable. I was happy, scared, shocked, overwhelmed, content, nervous, terrified, and thrilled all at once. I replayed the wedding over and over in my head 1,000 times and counted the mistakes I made, but I took solace that at the end of the night, Christina hugged me and thanked me. She said her day was perfect and couldn't have dreamt of a better wedding. Naturally, I had worried she'd change her mind when she saw my picture, so I prayed for a miracle, and it arrived. After the wedding, I downloaded the pictures and chose 70 photos to create for a wedding slideshow. I quickly edited them, and within a few days of Christina's wedding, I emailed her a link to watch it online. The following day, I received an email from Christina in which she thanked us and said she loved her pictures. I blinked a few times to make sure I read her words correctly. Shortly thereafter, I received feedback from the bridesmaids saying they loved the photos too. The miracle revealed itself. The emotional connection a bride has with her photos far outweighs perceived flaws a photographer may feel about her work. It isn't to say that mediocre photographs are acceptable, but rather, the sum of the client experience, the emotional connection, and personal affinity to the memories captured are immeasurable benefits to a growing photographer. There was a part of me still that worried about the 800 images that were unseen, but I immediately began editing the photo to provide a timely turnaround on the processing. When the wedding was completed, I mailed Christina a disc of the images with a handwritten note expressing my heartfelt appreciation for her support and trust in having me. Having read about my struggles and learning curve about my photography blog, she knew I was in the early stages of my business and yet still chose to hire me. I felt indebted. A few weeks later, Christina emailed me to let me know she was still going from her wedding and printed out some of the photos to hang on the walls of her new home. I was elated. Last year, I ran into Christina and her sister while shopping. We hugged and briefly chatted about life. We exchanged stories and laughs, and I thanked her again for the opportunity she provided to begin my career. So, this leads us now to how I got my first wedding. So I first needed to explain that there was a reason why the slideshow worked so well for me, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, how it turned into an entire marketing device in a second. But before we actually get to that point, I received my first wedding as a referral from my own wedding photographer. He was in an entirely different price range, and my first bride had $1,000 to spend on wedding photography. And so I was like, funny, that's what I charge. So that was kind of like how I started my, my packages, my collections at the time. Now, it gets very much into detail about how I started my business, how I started the early marketing, how I got my first wedding in Exposed, so I'm not really gonna get there, and I also spoke about it in the first and second course. So what I wanna talk about would be the issues that I faced as a photographer when I first shot that wedding. So I think during my first and second year, what I struggled with the most was the lack of confidence. I think as you build your business, the first thing that you're struggling with is that moment of realizing, am I capable of actually doing this? The second issue that I feared as a photographer was going to be the fact that I struggled with fear. The fact that I couldn't even own the fact that I was getting into something that I might be diving in over my head. The third thing that I struggled with as a photographer going into my first wedding was that I didn't comprehend the timeline because I had depended on other photographers to do it. I didn't understand how to address the issues that I saw on the timeline because I had gotten the timeline like 3 days before the wedding. So now, as a seasoned photographer, I look back at that and realize if there are changes to be made to a timeline, I need to be receiving the timeline much earlier. So now what I've learned is I now request to see the timeline of the day at minimum 3 weeks in advance. And who am I contacting for that? The bride herself and or her wedding coordinator. Because there's more leeway in massaging it 5 or 10 minutes here, 5 or 10 minutes here, but you can't massage a timeline 3 days before the wedding. And that's what I needed, that's what I wish I had known back then. And the fourth thing that I had battled with, the issue that I had faced as a photographer on my first wedding, was that I had a second shooter who was running late. So that in and of itself was extraordinarily difficult to deal with. Now, I want to talk about, because the focus is going and getting published. So I don't want to talk too much about the business. I want to really talk about getting published. And so one of the things that I had seen so often is like people and photographers using their images as a way to promote their business, essentially their marketing. Now, in order for me to get marketing details, I understood that a large part of the marketing relied on detailed photographs, not just of the bride and groom. I wish that I had known that well in advance, but now it's something that I know now. Now we can pass that information on to you. So the issues that I faced while I was shooting the details was, one, I didn't know how to pace the day in regard to shooting the details. I knew that I had to shoot them and I knew that they had to be done, but prior to this point, I had worked with second shooters and I had never taken the time to actually comprehend what they were doing and when. I'd worked with first shooters and I was their second shooter, and I didn't take the time to comprehend what was happening and when. They were telling me, hey, can you go do this? Hey, can you go do this? And I would say, yes, of course, certainly. What I should have been doing was processing. What are they doing and when are they doing it? And when should I be sending my second photographer to do those types of things on the wedding day? Now, I didn't notice what time this ceremony was. Now, if you're getting a timeline in your first and second year and you're not liking what time that is happening, that conversation needs to be happening months and months and months before the wedding invitation is printed. If your bride tells you, I love the way that you shoot those photos that has like the sun behind them or has a golden sky, perfect. If you want sunset photos, your ceremony should be at minimum an hour before sunset, an hour and a half if you want to do family portraits. After, if you want to do bridal portraits, after. So these are the conversations that you need to have with your clients to educate them in advance. If you want sunset pictures, you need to have a ceremony that's before sunset. If you want to have, then you can instruct them about the perks of doing a first look, having a ceremony that's closer to sunset, taking care of all of those formal photos in advance, and saving 10 minutes for that beautiful sunset light, and then the couple can go and enjoy cocktail hour, the girl can get a hair transformation, or they can just enjoy a drink by themselves. But the key to that is having conversation with her, and all of a sudden you sound extraordinarily confident. You know what you're doing, because if you look at it and be like, oh, I don't know if this timeline looks right, she's gonna say, well, I still want my sunset ceremony. You can't pitch it that way. You have to say, if you would like this, then there has to be changes. So you have to understand that sunset is but 10 or 15 minutes on any given day. And if she wants sunset photos, she has to rearrange it. Or if she wants a sunset ceremony, we have to then do a first look, or all of your photos will be illuminated with flash. If my client knows that in advance and I can tell her, I had a bride contact me, and a Texas bride, and she was having a ballroom wedding, and she wanted a sunset ceremony, and she wanted everything, and then she realized that everything was gonna be indoors, and she didn't want to go outside, and all of a sudden I had to stop, and I had to say, okay, if you want this, and if you want this, and if you want this, then you're gonna have to change all of these other things. And I told her, my style isn't to necessarily bring 3 or 4 sets of flash. That's beautiful photography. It's just not what I do. I can give you a great recommendation for a photographer who does that type of photography, because I knew that this wedding was going to be a thorn in my side, and I knew that I was not going to be able to offer her what she was looking for. She wanted a certain type of photography. She knew that I was an editorial type of photographer, but I would have to bring in lights that I wasn't ever familiar to working with. Plus, the wedding was in Texas. I'm located in California. I foresaw a very big headache, and I just realized this isn't a good fit for me. But I only can make that decision after having made so many mistakes in the past. So if I could save you of any mistakes, let's start getting into it. Okay. Now, the third issue that I faced when shooting details was that I didn't register that cocktail hour and reception was on the same location. So when you arrive on a wedding day, one of the first things I do is I walk the premises. JD and I arrive early. He thinks it's absolutely crazy how early I leave on a wedding day. I don't care. There could be traffic, there could be a hailstorm, like you never know. So we arrive early. and we walk the premises. I want to know exactly what is happening where, because if now I know that the ceremony and the cocktail hour are in one location, I must then go and tell the wedding coordinator or whoever's in charge. Before the ceremony, I need everything to be set so I can get a photograph of that. And I let them know hours in advance. And I said, the bride has requested this particular photo. And then I just need to make sure that somebody is on the same page with me, because I can't simply go to the catering manager and say, I need the table set for this photo, because he'll be like, okay. And if it doesn't happen, who is liable? I can't say, oh, I told the catering manager. So I'm finding somebody else to become accountable to. Now I'm working with a lot more wedding coordinators so I can keep her accountable, he or she accountable. But in the beginning years, I needed to keep somebody accountable. And usually the girl will say, oh, this is my mom, this is my sister. I usually ask for an emergency contact before getting to the wedding. Whoever that emergency contact is, that's the person that I'm telling, hey, listen, I realize that the cocktail hour and the ceremony are in the same location. I just want to let you know, in order for us to get the detail shots that, you know, Michelle wanted, I'm going to have it by this time. As long as we're on the same page. And if it is not done, I am no longer responsible for that photo because I couldn't have gotten that photo. So all you want to do is set expectations and then manage expectations. That's really important. Because what happens at cocktail hour and the reception then being at the same location is people are actually sitting on the tables, and when you go to take table shots, people have their purses, they put their drinks down, they scrunch up the tablecloths, and all of a sudden you can't get the photo that you need without it looking cheap, when the bride actually spent time designing it. I also didn't take the chance to shoot the food and overall centerpieces during my first wedding because I realized, okay, well, we shot to sunset, then we had bride and groom photos, we had family photos, we had bridal party photos, and then they walked immediately into the first dance. And all of a sudden, as they're going through the first dance, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to rearrange at least one table, take out all the cameras and purses and jackets and everything to shoot the photos that I need. And I probably had 2 minutes to do so. So as they're doing that, they did the prayer, they did the toast, and then they got up and they had like a buffet line. That first table, I was like, JD, run! And we like took everything down. We just put everything down. We shot whatever we could. And I'm gonna show a few of those details in a second because I'm just telling you they're pretty epic. Okay, and I'm showing these pictures because, listen, I'm still proud of those pictures. They're not the best, but you know, I was new and I was trying really hard. And my bride, Christina, knew well in advance what she was getting. I put it out in the open. I wasn't trying to hide behind a facade that, oh, hey, I have it together. Oh, hey, I'm the next, you know, coming like epic photographer ever. No, it was like, this is where I am and I'm gonna do the best I could. And I did. Although I'm really happy of how far we've come. Okay, and then lastly, I should have spoken up to the bride and to her wedding coordinator. Fortunately for me, this was the wedding coordinator's very first wedding and my first wedding. I should have spoken up and I should have told her how much time I needed, and yet it never crossed my mind to even say, can you salvage one table off to the side and not sit anybody there until I get that? There was no communication with me and the wedding coordinator, which was nobody's fault but my own. So if that's the one thing that you learn, I always ask, even before the wedding starts, I get a wedding inquiry to this day, the first question that I ask is, are you working with a coordinator, and if so, who? If I've worked with that wedding coordinator in the past, it incentivizes me to actually want to work that wedding, because if I'm working with a good wedding coordinator, my job is made easier. If I'm working with a difficult wedding coordinator, my job is made much worse. So those are the types of questions. The fourth issue that I was facing as I was shooting details was that I always worked with another photographer and they told me what to do. If I had the opportunity to look back at those experiences, so people who are second or third shooting right now, use every opportunity with the other photographer to see what they're doing and truly understand how are they dividing up the day. And everybody does it different. I take primary responsibility for shooting details on a wedding day, and I have JD come in with me, and if I'm very overwhelmed with it, he'll help with a few shots, and then he goes directly to cocktail hour, and he does what I call a swoop. Why we call it a swoop, I have no idea. I was like, go do the swoop. And he's like, okay, like I'm a swoop. And so he'll go to cocktail hour, and he'll get photos of the guests during cocktail hour, which I've come to learn through mistakes. There was my first 4 weddings, and I saw a pattern with my brides saying, I didn't get very many photos of my guests during cocktail hour. And I'm just like, well, you didn't tell me you wanted them, you know? And it was like, wait, I should be knowing this. And I didn't, because I wasn't paying attention to the photographers in advance. So what I learned from that day is I have JD, and even if it is but for 10 or 15 minutes, go in, shoot candids, and then shoot posed photos. People just love that in retrospect. I didn't understand that component because I had a 25-person wedding. Of course everybody had photos. There was only 25 people people there. So these are the things that I was learning along the way. So understand what another photographer is doing, apply it to your business, and then make adjustments as you go from there. So I'm going to show a few photos from my very first wedding. So this was a mistake. JD, I'm sorry, could I bother you for a tissue? I'm hot 1 second and then I'm cold another second. Okay, story of my life. Okay, so, but I'm cold, but I don't want the fan to go away. I know, I'm very complex. Okay, so this was a photo that I had JD take. So I was running around and I told him, I was like, this is gonna be the reception site. Can you just please get a photo? And this is the only photo that we have from the entire wedding that's the overview of what it actually looked like. But what I should have asked him to do was talk to the wedding coordinator to see if there was any possibility of at least placing a couple, centerpieces on the table, because they did have centerpieces. There weren't any plates on the table. Like, I was just like, go and get the shot. I was so panicked that day that I wasn't thinking it through. In order to get the shot, what did we need to make it happen? Okay, talk about tilt. Look at this tilt. Like, you know, it's like, wow, that is some epic tilt going on. I know. And I will say, I hate tilt. It is this thing with me. I can't, and I know that some photographers think it's like an artistic thing, and slight tilt is maybe okay and creative. This is extreme tilt, and it makes me ill. Like, if you stand entirely this way, it might look good, but the reason, in retrospect, I had to take this photo, and I looked at this photo, I told JD, I was like, did I really take this photo? Like, really? Like, oh my gosh. And I remember specifically what was happening. We were shooting in a garden, and the only lights that we had were those Chinese lanterns above. I couldn't reflect or foof the light from any source whatsoever, so I remember turning, and clicking until until my flash hit the white tablecloth to illuminate the menu. So that was my big, instead of just getting my flash and turning it so that it hit, I just turned until I got it. So avoid that mistake. I'm actually telling you these things so that you can do this is what not to do. So, and I'm okay laughing at myself. I can completely care less because we've come a long way. What I will say though, one of the flaws perhaps of how I was shooting was that I was kind of getting in, thank you so much. Thank you. All right, got some ice. Okay, so what I will say was, as I was shooting details at the time, I shot them very close. And I don't know if it's as beneficial to shoot details so tight, because part of what makes details is the story around the details. You know, it started off, this was my first wedding. She had a very, very, very small budget, but I was so impressed because with her small budget, they really maximized so much of it. What I should have done is backed away and gotten, see how this the napkin on the lower right-hand corner has already been broken and laid down because a guest had already been there. So I was trying to omit those details to betray that the scene had already been distorted. But I should have pulled back, gotten the folded napkins, gotten the bouquets on the left side of the bread basket. I should have pulled back and got more of the photo. So that was just like one thing that I would encourage people to kind of take a look. This was my very first cake shot. Again, I remember taking this photo specifically, and it's not so much a tilt, it's all the creative tilt. But I remember taking it in such a way because it was actually in a gazebo, and I needed to reflect the light off something. I was in a pitch black garden, but the gazebo was slightly illuminated. So I was trying to use my flash to reflect anywhere in the light gazebo to kind of get this photo. And again, shooting very tight really betrayed the beauty of what she had done. She had laid out a white covering, and then she had made like a dessert bar. And this was like dessert bar in 2006, y'all. Like, this is like money. And I didn't get an overall dessert shot because I just didn't know. And we're gonna get into why I didn't know in a second. Everyone's like nodding, like, yeah, that's money, that's money. Okay, so this is my very first marketing piece. I actually don't believe in formal forms of marketing, but what I do believe is in helping others build their business. And I've talked about these kind of templates before. I created a template in Photoshop and grabbed, at this point, this is 7 photos from the wedding. I didn't produce photos that I was so extraordinarily proud of on that wedding day, but I took what I had. I made a 5x7 template. I got 6 of my favorite photos from the wedding day, and only maybe 1 or 2 of the bride and groom. It was usually only 1, but in this particular case, I felt like the gazebo decorated with the flowers around the outside, showcased the coordinator's ability to do what she was doing. And I made a promo card for Courtney of Joyful Weddings and Events. This is the first time that we'd ever encountered each other, and I wanted to say thank you for working with her. She made the day so splendid. It was wonderful working with her. So what I included were details that I felt defined her services. Oh, I took a picture of the Chinese lanterns, the bouquets, the bread basket with the tilt, y'all. I could have fixed the tilt in Photoshop, and I did it. I don't even think I knew how to fix tilt in Photoshop. I'm just saying. I'm not even lying. One photo of the bride and groom, the cake, and then a ring shot. It's very, very basic. I got them printed, and I think what this total investment cost me was somewhere in the ballpark of $25 to $30. I got a white ribbon, tied a white ribbon around these 5x7 cards. I made a little tiny cardboard print of my J-Star logo, tied it with the bow, a handwritten note, and I sent it to Courtney. It was 25 cards. 25 cards, cost me $25 to $30. Now, what resulted from this was that I had the ability to give Courtney something she was proud of, a tangible piece to showcase her work, but it was also my work. But I wasn't out there handing out 5x7s to prospective clients because that's not my stilo. It was Courtney's, and I made her something for her that she was proud to showcase. As a byproduct of that, I was able to work with Courtney later in 2007 for 3 other weddings. So I could safely say that $30 produced me 3 other weddings working with a coordinator that I really enjoyed. That's like, for me, one thing that I continued to do through the entirety of my first year. I don't do it now anymore because I don't know if it necessarily reflects the brand that I'm trying to promote, but at that particular time, my brand was simply get weddings, shoot weddings, get it done. So that was my very first marketing piece. And I talk about the J-Star cheer squad. I wrote about them in Exposed. This is my very first bridal party photo of girls, and I don't know, I'm just really thankful for these 12 girls because they went out and they took that wedding slideshow, with the one that they had emotionally connected to, and they sent it to their friends, and then their friends sent it to other friends, and they became like this undeniable force of really changing the dynamic of my business. It started growing by word of mouth, and these were the girls to really get it going. So I'm very, very, very thankful for them.